Many of us are involved as leaders and board members of new or emerging nonprofits. Whether working with the homeless, the environment, animals, children, or one of the many, many types of charitable organizations, every new leader wonders, are we doing this right? Enter Renee McGivern and Nonprofit Spark. Each week, Renee and her guests walk through an area of nonprofit work in clear, concise, and practical themed shows. Whether it's about best practices, developing and keeping a volunteer force, fundraising, effective governance, or hiring staff, to name but a few, you can boost your nonprofit know-how and confidence. Renee and Nonprofit Spark have arrived.
Welcome to Nonprofit Spark, a show for leaders and board members of new and emerging nonprofits. 2 weeks ago, I replayed a 2012 interview with Aaron Rome about writing a statement of need for a grant proposal. It is a really helpful show if you're new at grant writing and need to understand the kind of data and stories that you must compile to make a persuasive case for support. Now, this week, Aaron and I take this conversation further to look at how creating pilot projects can help startups come to life and existing organizations grow. Aaron Rome has been a grant writer and even a grant maker for 17 years. His fundraising experience started in his mid-20s when he founded a nonprofit aimed at improving education at urban high schools. He's based in Rhode Island, but writes proposals for nonprofits around the country. Part of the work he does is help nonprofits figure out if they have good information to write a proposal and what they need to do to get ready to do that. He often suggests creating a pilot program to test a theory about how to build services to solve a community problem or improve them. This week's show focuses on creating pilot programs that can become the jumping-off point for a new nonprofit or for a new program for an emerging organization. One type of nonprofit has no track record and the other one does, but leaders of both types of organizations can use the common sense advice you'll hear on this show. Enjoy. Welcome back to Nonprofit Spark, Aaron.
Thanks for having me back, Renee. I guess I did something right in my last interview.
Yes, you did. All right, Aaron, pilot programs. What is a pilot program and why do some nonprofits set one up?
Okay. First, let me just say why you do a pilot program. The reason pilot programs are important is that you can look at it from the perspective of a startup organization or an existing organization. And from the point of view of a startup, the pilot program is just getting your feet wet. It's giving you something to test your idea, to see if you have a viable idea for a program. And funders want to see that before they're even going to consider you for a grant. For existing organizations, it's an inexpensive way to test a theory, to test a new program you maybe want to implement with your larger population. And the pilot program should be designed to give you some measurable results. So essentially, it's a mini program that takes less time and less resources than your typical program to implement.
All right. Now, for a new organization, the pilot program really is the program itself. So somebody's got a great idea. So, for instance, I met recently with a young man who has an idea for a nonprofit, and that is connecting personal trainers like himself to troubled youth who could use a boost in self-esteem. He's theorizing and would really benefit from one-on-one training and feeling better about themselves physically. So those are his ideas. Now, in his case, putting together a pilot program is a way to test his theory. Is that the idea?
Well, it does two things. It's going to let him know whether or not there's any viability to his idea, and it's also going to let funders know that he's serious about his organization and show them that he can get results. So in his case, he probably has, everyone has a lot of people have a great idea, but a great idea without anything to back it up doesn't really go very far. And just to give an example of, put it in the framework that some people may understand, if you look at, there's a couple shows that are on primetime TV that everyone in the audience has heard, American Idol and Shark Tank. Now, everyone knows in American Idol, you've got a broad spectrum of skill sets that come onto that show. You've got people who are undiscovered talents, rising stars, and you've got people who are just
horrible,
should be singing in the shower still. And those people don't belong in the show, but it makes it more interesting when they put those people up there. So to bring this back to a pilot program in an organization, you don't want to be that guy that is up there and can't stay in tune, because you'll get humiliated. And although you may not get humiliated by having an idea that you can't implement from a funder or other organizations, you won't go very far unless you have something to back up your idea. So if you're not a good singer, you don't belong in American Idol. And if you don't have any results to show from your idea, then you're probably not ready to start your organization and to get funding.
Well, and it's painful for a funder or somebody that gets a request for money when it's clear someone is a real amateur.
Yeah, I was watching Shark Tank the other day, and there was two interesting examples. One, there was an 11-year-old girl came on the show, and the venture capitalists were sort of looking down at her, shaking their heads, but they treated her like everyone else, and they started asking us the same critical questions they asked to vet any potential investment. First thing they said is, what were your sales last year? I figured she's going to say like $50 or something. She said $1.1 million for an 11-year-old kid.
Wow.
So they went a step further. They said, well, tell us about your distribution network. Well, we have 1,000 boutiques across the country that sell our custom-made jewelry that we design. So all their eyes popped out of their heads. So this little girl developed instant credibility, not because she was cute or she had a great idea, but because she had results. She had already achieved demonstrable results.
Gotcha.
The other guy on the show had some kind of flashy, some new product that he hadn't tested, hadn't even developed a prototype. Essentially, it was still just in idea format, and he was looking for $500,000. So he pretty much got left off the show. So.
Wow. Age doesn't matter, does it? It's the results. So in her case now, well, let's just go back to an idea of a newer nonprofit. So, the young woman that you described, that 11-year-old girl, she had already been at this for a while. In the case of a new nonprofit, they haven't done anything yet. And a pilot program, is that sort of the right lingo or framework that would persuade a funder to give them money, saying, I'm thinking this through. How about coming in on this with me? So it's kind of like those venture capitalists. How about coming in on this with me? Here's the elements I think are going to work, backed up by this kind of data. Is that the kind of thing that's supposed to be going on there? Because otherwise, how is it any different than if they just, wrote a foundation and said, are you interested in what I'm up to?
Well, in most cases, you're not going to get funding for the pilot program if you're a startup. You're going to have to run the pilot program with money out of your own pocket, with your own time invested in volunteers and so forth. Whereas an established organization already has a credibility and a track record, and they actually may get funding to run their pilot program. So people say, well, how do I get a grant to start my business or my company or my nonprofit if no one gives money to startups? And this is how you do it. You start small. When I was about 25 years old, I joined a nonprofit organization which consisted of one guy who started it about a year earlier, and he started it on his own dime. Essentially, he was working with at-risk youth in high schools. He just went in and started volunteering, started organizing events at the school, and the kids loved him, the school loved him, and after volunteering there for a couple months, they found a few $1,000s to pay him a very small stipend. But he had 6 roommates, and he ate ramen noodles, and over the summer he went on unemployment. But after a year, he had helped 50 or 60 kids. He had taken them on all kinds of great trips. He had volunteers helping him, and so he had a lot to point to that to show that he was viable, and his organization had a future, and he really inspired people in the grant-making community to support him. So he started small with nothing and essentially built it. And after a couple of years, we grew to 15 staff people on a $400,000 budget. So it can be done, but you have to start with realistic expectations.
Somewhere along the line, I want to get over to the existing nonprofits. They've been around a while, 8, 10 years or something like that. What's different for them is they've already got a track record. They have a reputation. And is there something unique beyond that about them writing a pilot program?
Yeah, well, you're Obviously, a better position if your organization has been around for a few years at least, and you have some results to point to, then you're going to be taken more seriously by the funding community. I work with an organization in New Hampshire that helps African refugees assimilate into their new culture. It's called Women for Women Coalition. And for about 5 years, they've been running language programs, mostly pretty effectively. I think 60 to 70% of the people are able to learn the language and use that in their interaction with their kids' teachers and at their workplace and so forth. But there's a small percentage, 20, 30%. A lot of them are older immigrants who just can't learn a lick of English. After 3 or 4 years here, they can only speak a couple words. Yet year after year, they're going through the same traditional language program. Well, they're actually starting a new program in partnership with Dartmouth College called the Rosseus Institute. It's not a new program, but it's new in the sense that it's never been implemented on site with this particular demographic. So, and it's a cultural-based program. There's a lot of one-on-one instruction, and there's pre, mid, post tests. So it's a very different methodology that they're trying to get at this subset of the population who just can't learn the language. And if you can't learn the language, you can't assimilate. It's really critical to the mission of the organization. So if they had absolutely no experience, if you want to look at the other extreme, if they were a new organization and they said, we want to try this new program, they probably wouldn't have much success getting funding. But because they've already been running language programs, they're most likely going to get what they need to start it. Which brings me to the point I want to bring up. What are the attributes? What are the important attributes of a pilot program? And for the case of an organization like this, the risk of failure is pretty important. If there was no risk of failure, then there would really be no point in doing it because someone would have done it already. So you don't have to be guaranteed or have an extremely high likelihood of success to venture and try something new. If there's an unmet need and you think you have a good shot at addressing that need, then you should go forward with it. Another attribute is innovation, doing something differently. And it should also be based on theory, testing some theory. So in this case, there was a risk that these women may not learn the language, but the upside was that if they did, then they'll have reached a population that were unreachable for 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
It's innovative. It's being done in a way that's never been done before. And they theorize that if they try these 2 new techniques, then they'll learn in a new way. And one more thing is it's replicable and expandable, so it can be used throughout their program and also potentially in other refugee communities across the country.
Yes, very good. Well, you're listening to Nonprofit Spark. I'm your host, Renee McGivern, and I'm speaking with Aaron Rome. He has been a grant writer and even a grant maker for 17 years. His fundraising experience started in his mid-20s when he founded a nonprofit aimed at improving education at urban high schools. You know, I'm glad you brought that up about the risk of failure. So the funders are okay with that. They understand that there's a risk of failure here.
Well, you know, every funder is different. Some are more risk-averse than others.
Yes.
Some actually seek out risky ventures because they want to be different. They want that to be their niche.
Okay.
And obviously, the more risk, the higher potential reward. So there are definitely funders that want to take the safe road, and others that are willing to take a chance.
Now, if someone were looking on websites of grant makers, would they be able to tell because they've listed programs that say pilot program, or because they say their values are innovation, or what would be an indicator to them that, this might be a possibility?
You just, I think, have to use your common sense and look at all the materials in the right context. I know of one particular foundation that's very unique in that they support individuals with a transformative idea. I had a client who has a son with albinoism. I can't remember how to say it correctly, but she's from East Africa. And children born with albinism in that country are a lot of times killed because there's superstition about that there's spirits or that if you grind up their bones, that they can use for healing. It's just all this terrible stuff. So she had this idea to essentially change the culture through education and a communication campaign, that sort of thing. So there's a foundation that specifically will support individuals with some kind of crazy, unique idea that has potential to impact thousands or millions of people. And they'll support you with $100,000 a year for 3 years. And they know that probably 80% of the people they fund won't make it, but the couple that they do, who knows? Maybe it's the next Bill Gates.
Okay, well, I have to ask who that foundation is because I know my audience is going, who is that?
Yeah, I'm going to have to look it up. Let me look it up, and I'll get back to you.
Okay.
At the end of the show, if I can multitask and do that while I'm talking.
All right. Something else to know about pilot programs. So even like the young man I told you about at the very beginning, pilot program, the money's coming out of his pocket and from the friends and family members he knows, for instance. He's going to be testing a theory. So do you have an example of somebody you've worked with that's testing a theory?
Well, yeah, I'll give you another example, too. And this is an example of a startup organization. I was approached by a client, and I didn't realize until I took the job that she wasn't really quite ready to approach funders yet. And the reason why I sometimes tell clients I'll actually refuse to write a grant for them or even to do the research is because when you make that first phone call to a potential grant maker, that's essentially an intervention. That you're making a first impression, and you want that first impression to be a good one. So if I called up a grant maker on behalf of a client and said, my client wants to start a health program, do you have any money available? And they start asking me questions, and if I can't answer those questions, or I say they just started this last week and they don't have any volunteers, they don't have any money in the bank, they don't have an office, it's going to be very hard to go back to that funder in 6 months. So when a client approached me about a month ago, she was trying to raise a very reasonable amount of money, $8,000, to start a mobile health center. And the more I interviewed her, realized that the program wasn't really about the health center. It was about the outreach. It was about making that personal connection, the relationship with the people in the community that were obese, that had diabetes, high blood pressure, that weren't getting to the normal health center, and that she wanted to do something that was very important. She wanted to make that connection with them, bring them to our mobile unit where they would have nurses and doctors every couple weeks and get them on a program. So in order for that program to work, you really need to have liaisons going out to the community, doing regular follow-up and so forth. So she really didn't have any of that in place, and it is a new way of doing things. I mean, I'm sure it's been done before, but this is it's not the traditional approach to medicine, but it is something that's an innovative way to addressing the rising healthcare costs and identifying the people in the community that really need assistance.
Okay.
So it was a great idea. I really bought into the idea, but it's not good enough that it's a good idea because she gave me no indication that she could actually do it. And if she can't convince me, she's not going to be able to convince a grant maker. So
now, does she have a healthcare background of some kind?
She's a nurse. Actually,
okay.
She's a nutritionist, not even a nurse.
Nutritionist, okay.
But she's working with a nurse and a doctor. So the more I dive into the details, I realized that she really didn't have the background herself, and she hadn't lined up her ducks, per se, to even start the program. So she wasn't ready to approach a funder. So we set up a pilot program, and she is going to pick a handful of people that she knows in the community through her church that are sick, that need help, and she's going to start working with them on a long-term basis. She's going to meet with them regularly. She's going to have their health measures taken, blood pressure, cholesterol, weight, etc., have them meet with doctors and nurses regularly, and then she's going to measure the results over time. So it is a time-consuming process. It probably takes 6 months or more. And then after that process, she will have data on a small group of people that will show positively or negatively that her program, she's going to show that whether or not the program works.
Well, I got to say right there, Aaron, if after 6 months their cholesterol level hasn't gone down or their blood pressure is still really high, and I mean, the thing to learn there is that tackling that problem is tougher than she thought. It isn't like wasted time.
Exactly.
But I could see where she might be quite discouraged at the end of 6 months and wonders, and she may wonder if she should move forward with her idea.
That's a possibility. The other possibility is that she's going to learn from that experience and she's going to change her technique and try something new, and that's really how the true social entrepreneurs get filtered out of the crowd, the ones that are going to stick to it. I consider myself a social entrepreneur and a regular entrepreneur, and I've failed way more times than I've succeeded. So, and that's partly what, from a fundraising perspective, that's grant makers know that. They know that the type of people they fund are the risk takers, the innovators, people willing to take a chance, and they don't expect you to succeed all the time, but they want to know that you've tried. And I mean, really, you have to show that you're helping the community before you're going to get a grant, and it's going to be a small one to start, most likely.
All right, well, we're going to take a little break for a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
Clifton Gunderson and Larson Allen, two national accounting firms, have come together to form Clifton Larson Allen. The combined firm serves more than 5,900 nonprofit and government clients. You can call on Clifton Larson Allen for help with financial and compliance audits, tax preparation, temporary or full-time accounting assistance, and to develop proactive financial strategies for tough economic times. Clifton Larson Allen cultivates long-lasting client relationships so they understand the issues you've faced and the challenges ahead of you. Learn more about Clifton Larson Allen on their website at www.cliftonlarsonallen.com. Clifton Larson Allen, noticeably different.
Welcome back to Nonprofit Spark. I'm your host, Renee McGivern, and you can learn more about me on my company website at sparkplugconsulting.com. I'm speaking this week with Aaron Rome. He has been a grant writer and even a grant maker for 17 years. He's based in Rhode Island, but he's written grants for nonprofits all over the U.S. His fundraising experience started in his mid-20s when he founded a nonprofit aimed at improving education at urban high schools. Well, Aaron, let's keep going. I just a couple more ideas or thoughts about this new startup. Anything else like like you sat down, she came to you and said, you're really not ready. You're really not ready. So here's what we ought to be doing. Did you actually guide her through, here's some things you ought to be testing? Here's some things based on, here are the kind of things that would look good and ultimately in a funding proposal. Is that where you come from on that?
Yeah, with her, developing the pilot program was not what I signed up for, so I advised her, gave her some general advice, and talked to her about what kind of data she's going to want to collect. And that was a key thing there, is the pilot program should be designed to yield measurable results. I am actually working with a client right now specifically on developing a pilot program. This is a new organization that had a very broad scope when I spoke to them. They wanted to help poor, destitute people in the world. So we've narrowed their focus down to an area in Washington, D.C.
You mean she wanted the whole world?
Well, just Africa and the United States.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, but the more we talk, the more I realize that they actually do have some areas of focus that we're honing in on, and she has a lot of experience actually helping people, but it wasn't articulated the right way. So she's helped people get jobs. She's helped people go from homelessness to get a place to live.
Okay.
She's helped victims of domestic violence get back on their feet. So she's done this, some of it through her organization, some of it on her own. But what I've advised her is that she really needs to do two things. One, she needs to go back and document everything that she has done with the individuals. So
good idea.
You can quantify how many people you've helped, how many people have you helped get a job, get housing, get services, get health care, and not just referrals, but what are the results over time? Have you actually helped these people improve their health outcomes or have shelter for over a long period of time? And the other thing was to pick a group of 5 to 10 people that she wants to mentor going forward for the next 6 months and develop a model that can then be followed as she recruits initially new volunteers, maybe eventually staff. But at this point, she's getting all the work done through volunteers. So it's important to get good data, set up your pilot program so you get measurable results, and not just that, but to create a framework for the larger program. So try to create
Erin,
a model.
Something you mentioned here with her and previously is the idea of volunteers. And it occurs to me that, we could have a great idea and we could actually be starting out on, like the nurse with the mobile health program and health support. But it really works a lot better in the long run if the person can demonstrate the ability to pull other people into the project. Because otherwise it's like her and her sister or something.
Right, yeah.
So it seems to me like the more volunteers you have engaged, they represent the community. The funders want to see that there's community support. So to build that in would be really smart from the very start. And the same would hold true, it seems to me, even with existing nonprofits, that there are board members, there are extra volunteers, there are all kinds of people from the community representing the community who are getting up underneath it.
Yeah, exactly. Your constituency is very, very important to show that you're tied into that community. And one thing I was talking to my client about today is that you can't help people unless you have a relationship with them. You can't, you need to have trust. People need to know you from the neighborhood or from your church you have to have some kind of connection. So we were actually, in this particular case, able to narrow down her demographic for the pilot program and eventually her program from just a blanket, the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area, to a very specific neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where they had connections with the librarian community. That's the tie-in they have to the community, and that's going to enable them to pull in volunteers.
Nonprofits are a community asset, and they need to be called forth from a community, not just one person or just a little, a few people. It really needs to be called forth, it seems to me. And if I'm a funder, I'm certainly looking at.
It's a great point. It sort of brings to mind the word empowerment, which is a word I hate to use because something that stuck with me a long time ago, someone said, I think I used the word, I don't remember what context, and they said, you can't empower someone. Some people have to take the power themselves. So empowerment is sort of an oxymoron. And it's the same thing with when you're building an organization. You can't come in and you can't impose services on a people or on a community that you think they need. They have to want it themselves. They have to identify with the organization, with the program, and realize that it's something that can help them. Otherwise, it won't be success. An example is this organization I work with in New Hampshire that works with refugees from Africa. They started 5 years ago with just a couple people, but it's a very vibrant organization because everyone that comes into that state as a refugee gets helped, and they give back because they're so thankful to have someone to help them, and they're so connected with the people of their own culture that it's a natural tendency to want to gravitate towards this organization, which essentially represents them.
Yes. All right. Anything else you want to say about pilot programs?
Well, just to summarize a couple main points, the important elements to think about are that there should be some risk involved. It should be innovative. You should be testing an idea. And two most important things is that your pilot program should be designed so that it's going to yield measurable results, because that's going to help you implement the services better, and it's going to help you put you in a better position to actually win grant funding. And the final thing is that it should be designed to be both replicable and expandable. So you start small to see if it works, and hopefully you can extrapolate on that and serve more people. Ideally, if it can be done in such a way that other organizations, other communities could use it even better.
Yeah, that replicable thing, it waves the flag at me that people need to be prepared to write stuff down, the processes, how they, even to the point of, let's say somebody 60 miles down the road is going to offer something similar. The foundation has also been approached by that organization for something similar. The foundation says, look, organization A, we love this idea. I want to make sure that it's replicable, that you could actually walk in and teach somebody else how to do this. But you can't just have it in your head. It actually needs to be written out. Well, here's the process we went through. I first lined up volunteers. Then I approached hospitals. Then I enlisted the assistance of 6 doctors and 4 other nurses. Then we did this, found out it didn't work, but then we tried this, and then that part worked. So it actually it's like a story arc, has to be written out and constructed as you go along. And having done something like this, I'll tell you what, you do not want to wait. 12 months later.
I did yesterday.
Oh, Lord. Write it as you go, almost like, even if it's just like in a journal format. You know, keeping a journal, and then every few days you're adding to it. Or what I told this young man that I was meeting with here, he was gung-ho. He's got a website up, and he's got a blog. And he said, I don't know what to write for the blog. I said, it's because you have no program yet. I said, but at least for the blog, why don't you start writing down your conversations with people in the community you're connecting with? So write a blog post about our conversation. Write a blog post when you go talk to the community foundation director. I said, track your learning right there in your blog post. It's engaging. It's authentic. That's your guidepost for when you go to a foundation filing with a proposal saying, here's the process I went through and here's what I learned and why I learned that. And that's why I'm coming to you with a program like this now.
Right. And it also helps you synthesize your own ideas when you go through that process of writing stuff down and talking to people, and people give you critical feedback, and you're not afraid to hear that feedback that may not be positive. That's going to help you do what you do better.
I agree. It's very true about writing. Is the biggest value for me of having a blog a lot of time is that I'm thinking through, well, what do I think about this conversation I just had? What can I say about this experience, and what did I learn? And I'll tell you what, I have heard from interview after interview after interview from funders and people who have been in the nonprofit sector a long time. Corporate and foundation giving officers love and trust people who use critical thinking in what they're doing. They're not as interested in the people who just charge ahead. No, they want to know that they've actually been thinking carefully about all of this and then reworking things based on experience and solid thought.
Good point.
So, okay. Well, Aaron, how can people learn more about you?
Well, first of all, I want to give you the name of that foundation. I looked it up.
Okay.
It's the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, and they specialize in funding innovative leaders of the future.
Draper Richards Kaplan?
Yep, and they have a website. I have a website, aaronrome.com. People can look at my portfolio there, see what my services are and so forth, and I'm always happy to give a free consult to a new potential client, so call me anytime.
And you know, Aaron, it kind of makes sense to me that sometimes you're going to hear from somebody and they're really not ready, but that you could actually offer services that helps them get ready, because, you obviously had some great ideas for some other nonprofits that you've been working with. So thanks so much for being on Nonprofit Spark. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thanks, Renee. I appreciate the invitation.
Aaron Rome did a great job describing what a pilot program is and why a nonprofit would create one. And once again, you can check him out on his website at aaronrome.com. Now, here are the attributes of a great pilot program. 1, there should be some risk involved, and it should be innovative. 2, it should be designed to yield measurable results, like we served 25 young adults, and at the beginning of the program, their reading level was 5th grade, but at the end of the program, their reading level was 8th grade. 3, it should be expandable. So Aaron suggests you start small and see what works, and then add to it as you learn. And 4, it should be replicable. You should be able to do it right again and again, and even show someone else how to do it. Now remember to write things down in this pilot project so you have a record of your decisions and why you made them, who you involved in the project, what worked and what didn't work, and what you do differently next time. So be a critical thinker and learner, and you'll do just fine. Thanks for tuning in. Follow me on Twitter at NonprofitSpark, one word, capital N, capital S, and check out the show's blog at nonprofitsparkradio.com. Have a great week.
The staff of WebTalkRadio.net has a recommendation for those of you who are on the board of a nonprofit or work for one. Consider using a Nonprofit Spark show as a starting point for a great discussion about strategic planning, finances, fundraising, and more. All past shows are available in the archives. They offer a tremendous learning resource that you can access at your convenience. To learn more about Renee and her work, please visit her website at sparkplugconsulting.com. Or you can click on the globe on the screen in front of you. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week for another edition of Nonprofit Spark.